Yeah, Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I think I lost my internet.
No problem. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Sister Ambri, please. I started. I imagined myself at some other institute and starting the class already. So please do start.
Sure. So let's begin our session today with the Surah Al-Fatiha. So today is our fifth session. That is, or maybe fourth session after Ramadan. So we are going to discuss, inshallah, on methodology of redefined field of economics. So looking forward to hear, inshallah, incredible things from our lectures. Over to you, Dr. Ildus.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Sister Amreen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, welcome everyone. Alhamdulillah. Welcome to this fourth session. Actually, this is fifth session, and this is including the post-Ramadan discussion of our tadabbur. And so we are continuing to discuss the ideas of maqasid methodology, and today we'll go straight into the issue of methodology. But just to maybe retract a little bit back and remind our participants what we did and how we came to this specific topic is that we started with the idea of that there is something wrong with the current methodologies. There is something wrong in Islamic scholarship per se, and there are certain limitations and problems within what we call Islamic scholarship, and also in other schools of thought, whether it is in economics or in finance or in some other disciplines in social science. And so we touched upon the maqasidi ideas on and orientations on the future orientation, critical orientation, and comprehensive. So we talked about the limitations, and also last week we talked about the worldview and what would be kind of redefined. How do we relook at the worldview, and what would be the effects of the Quranic worldview on economics? And in our groups, actually, in Telegram group, there were some discussions and suggestions as to what should be the methodology, and something that we just suggested on passing, and that maybe the kind of approach of biology would be suitable, or maybe some other scientific approach would be suitable. But then it's not. It's something more comprehensive than that. Even though we just mentioned some of these life systems, so it's not clearly the biology approach or physics approach or something, or any other science-based approach. But what we did, let me just share the screen. Okay, so what we talked last time is we started with this economic phenomena, and we defined it as complex, multifaceted processes and interactions that extend beyond the conventional boundaries of economics, encompassing a wide range of elements. They involve the dynamic interplay of religious, social, cultural, environmental, and technological factors. And all of these, they shape the production, distribution, and consumption of resources within and across life systems. And there are different levels of connections and different levels of dependencies. And what I suggested, and we had some discussion on that, is the idea that whenever we talk about economics per se as a discipline, we talk about economic systems, economic policy, and economic analysis. And we gave some definition what it means. And we suggested that maybe we could move forward towards not economic systems, but life systems. And these are all systems that make life possible. And then not strictly economic policy, but public policy, and not strictly economic analysis, but the transdisciplinary approach or transdisciplinary analysis of reality in life systems and public policy. I'm here as like a student reciting some of what I have learned from scholars, and here we have scholars of public policy and economics, and this is what I have learned from some of you and from other scholars in the fields. So when we talk about methodology, I look at it that it is something that is important. There's definitely it is significant, and it is like a roadmap for research and for action. And I look at it as something that what drives me personally to do or to act the way I act every day. Let's say starting from morning, starting from the prayers, and let's say having breakfast, certain type of breakfast, and then working and doing some sort of work. And every day, let's say you are following a certain routine. It's a routine in your work, and something drives you to use that. And just like your choice of road or of transportation, every day something makes you to choose to make a decision to use something, to do something, or to avoid something. And so this is also part of methodology. It's something that we internalize. And this this internalization of some of the ideas, among which is the worldview, this actually guides our formulation of research questions, research approaches to research, whether we use qualitative approaches or quantitative approaches, or maybe something a mixture of these two. And what we do with this, with the knowledge that we have. So we have this something at the back of our minds that that guides us. Of course, we also encouraged in any research and publication, we encouraged to write down what are the steps that you are going to follow. And so it influences data collection and analysis. It shapes our interpretation of findings as well. So the methodology and of course the worldview in the end, it influences the way we practice something. And that's something, it can be in our academia, in education, in our action, in research. And so this is, it's not, of course, it's not a lecture on significance of methodology, but just as a reminder of myself. And here are some of the assumptions that I personally have in terms of some methodologies, but then of course we can discuss them more. First of all, the secular methodologies, they have a problem of short-termism, and this is what I refer to specifically to economic methodologies, and especially in the past 100, 150 years. So short-termism as a deeper philosophical problem in modern economies. Even though we can have discussions and have um, we can have papers or research that takes a little bit longer time frame, but in practice we see that the major predictions or the science of economics, it looks at short-term analysis. And then also modern secular analytical frameworks are inadequate or to effectively address public policy issues. And there are different reasons for that. Again, they stem from worldview, they stem from some our approaches to the issues at hand. And but looking at all of this, we know that there is so much happening going on. There is so much change, and as I said last time, there is no there's no homogeneity in science, in research, in all these areas. Of course, there are some mainstream ones. But there are other additional approaches and methodologies. And so this is where we see an increased interest in ideas of moral economy, circular economy, and now we have, and also even from the middle of 20th century, we see some ideas on like Buddhist economy, for example. And like I think it was Schumacher who wrote the what is that? Small is Beautiful. I think some of you may have read the book. So interesting approach to economics. I mean, and he is really opposing the idea of gigantism. That was the feature of the 20th century. You know, everything should be gigantic and huge economic projects. And so, but at the same time, we see, and here at the Maqasid Institute and in Islamic-based organizations and universities across the world, we see and we understand that the revelation provides the ultimate guidance for addressing humanity's problems. Which includes the economy, of course. And this is done through the emphasis on connectivity, cooperation, and compassion. And we talked about it from the very beginning: connectivity, the purposefulness, and the webs of meaning, which we will cover also in this and the next few classes. And it promotes the natural disposition, so fitra, to do good and pursue good. So this is what we may term as hayat al-tayyibah. And at the same time, I just want to go back to this ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, just a part of that ayah, but of course it is part of the other groups of ayahs, but where it is stated that أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن أعرض عن ذكري فإن له معيشة ضنكا. And whoever disregards my remembrance, he shall be a wretched life, a difficult life. And the opposite of it is the idea on حياة الطيبة. من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة. So whoever does a good, righteous deed, and whether male or female, and they are believers, we will cause them to live a good life. So this is just a part, maybe a very small part of the methodological approach. So we see how the Quran addresses some of this, some of the questions in life. So whether you follow or you don't follow the Sharia, the purposes of the Quran, the results will be either the wretched life, or the result could be a good life. But of course, it's not all. There are many nuances with that. Then evolution of economic methodologies, and this is just a very simple view, and some of you who are in the specialists in this area, please, I think you can add to it a lot more. But I see that the modern economic thought actually comes not only from the Greek thought, but also Islamic thought, and then goes through European scholasticism, and then it moves towards mercantilism. But during the mercantilism, we see that the religious ideas or the religious ideas, they take a step back, and gradually they are being abandoned. So under scholasticism at the, let's say, 11th, 12th, 13th to 14th centuries, up to 15th centuries, there are ideas of prohibition of usury, the focus on ethics, the ideas of just price, and so on. So we have the kind of integration of Christian metaphysics and deduction. But when we see that at the time of mercantilism, we see how gradually the hold of the church authorities is subsiding, and state, the city states and kingdoms, the nation states, they take hold, and so they begin a different approach appears. So this is where the observation, more observation-based, and also the pursuit of wealth as virtue, and gradual removal. We see gradual removal of moral and religious ideas or considerations in economic decision making, and so this is gradual move away from religion, from metaphysics, but still it is still in the it influences the worldview. But then we see the classical era, or the political economy, the era of political economy, where these scholars start using, like the Adam Smith and Ricardo. They start using hypothetical deductive methodology, so they use both induction and deduction, and this is where the idea of utilitarianism appears and started influencing the economics, or the study of the economy. And we can say that this is the beginning of the idea of the formal economics, or formal study of economic phenomena. And these are foundations of political economy. At the same time, or maybe at the confluence between classical and neoclassical era, we have also the ideas of Marxist approach and Austrian economics, and Marxist approach, Marxian economics, is said to be using this dialectic philosophy, which is basically which is based on the idea of change, or the philosophy of change, whereby there is the idea of change from the unity that pre-modern societies used to have, a unity of, let's say, a family or a tribe as one unit. And slowly this idea changes, and now the unity is not a human being, but the commodity. All right. So again, it's a complete change of focus, not from the person, not the wealth of nations, but then it is like in capitalism, it is the commodities, it is the capital. So the Marxian, Karl Marx, he looks and analyzes these things, but there is no specific. I have not found that like it uses some specific methodology. Maybe our participants could add to it. In Austrian economics, again, the focus is on the praxis, so the practical side. And this is more like an individualistic approach to economic analysis. This is where subjectivism is accepted, and mathematics and mathematical analysis is somehow it's not looked at very nicely, I would say. So they reject this kind of inductive analysis for inferring economic laws. And so, again, it is a sort of empiricism, but it is not. It's not the empiricism of using pure mathematics. And then after that starts the neoclassical period. It's also based on hypothetical deductive. It's empirical nature of research and analysis, and this is where we see proliferation of econometrics, statistics, and so on. And then we have Keynesian approach, and then after like 1970s in the second half of the 20th century, we see neoclassical and Keynesian synthesis, a kind of synthesis of the two. And institutional economics and others. So we also talked about them in our, I think, our last class or the class before that, when we talk about limitations. And so these are methodologies, but then we also see some strengths and limitations in some of these methodologies. And in my opinion, these strengths and limitations are this. So let's look at the strengths in my opinion. So please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, there is a lot of diversity. There are many different approaches, as I showed them. And there are many different schools of thought. All of them employ their own understanding and own methodology, and but they are open to new ideas. I mean, some of these schools may be very close, but some schools are quite open to new ideas. And science itself is said to be open to also open to new ideas, to developments that. And we can see some change, that they always some new ideas develop and some change happening in science and scientific discoveries and innovation and so on. But also, I think it is evolutionary in the sense that I showed that how the methodologies changed from being influenced by religion, by metaphysics, and until today, when we see that it is purely empirical. So there is an evolutionary change in those in methodologies. They try to minimize bias through these approaches, through empiricism. But of course, there is a lot of subjectivity in the research anyway. They try to do like empirical rigor, and there is some positive things about it. And I guess those who are in like Dr. Mahdi and Dr. Zaid could add to it. That there is some positive aspects of empiricism as well. And related to it are the evidence-based reasoning. and also solution-oriented. But orientation to the solution, it may be a strength, but also it is a sort of weakness, and I will talk about it in just a minute. And it has some ethical standards, and today we know that there are some like ethical standards that you have to follow as a maybe if you are a part of some association, or if your research is paid for by some research organization. They may have their own bodies or agencies that look at some ethical standards. And there are some ethical standards related to data collection, analysis, and interpretation. And lastly, in this section, and I will then stop, and we will discuss this before we start discussing the Maqasid methodology. Is that first of all, I think the all secular approaches today are anthropocentric. And it's a problem. It is problematic in the sense that a human being is placed at the very high, at the top of the fear of development, of evolutionary development. So we can say, and so a human as a center of these developments can have or has the right to use whatever he or she thinks to his or her own benefit, and as long as it benefits him or her, and we are the center is the apogee of this evolution. Then it's author-oriented in the sense that every author is using his or her own approach, and it can be from different, but it depends on the worldview. Really depends on the worldview. And if we see that the worldview is like Eurocentric or anthropocentric, then it affects the choice of methodologies. It affects the formulation of questions, and also the how we interpret or how we analyze the data. Also accepting only empirical evidences. I mean, I think some of this is where we can even discuss what would be the empirical evidences. And like in my when I remember when I applied for PhD at the Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance, they told me that you have to do empirical study, and by empirical they meant mathematical study, so the econometrics basically. And so this is why I chose ISTAC. So it's more philosophical based. So, but it again, the empirical study can be. It doesn't have. They don't have to be only based on pure mathematics. And potential to be influenced by funding institutions. Again, it really depends on what we. Sometimes it may depend on who sponsors sponsors this study or research, and what would be their requirement. In some institutions there will be freedom to do that, and of course in some they could ask you to focus on certain methodology. So narrow focus on material welfare. And then some assumptions are questionable, like the assumptions of utility, rationality, maximization, like shareholder value, and so on. And there are different levels, whether in economics, and in economics there are assumptions at the level of at micro, at macro, and in finance there are assumptions at the level of like pricing, for example, asset pricing, and the calculation of risk, and others. So assumptions, all of them, they based on certain weak and I would say questionable assumptions. And also illusionary power of science, that science is able to answer all questions and answering those questions by using this empirical approaches will give a more or less a generalizable answer. But then we see that it's not. There is a limited generalizability, and they are based on the context, on time and space. And even though they try to policymakers and economists, they try to use let's say neoclassical approaches in let's say carving policy measures in, let's say, in Malaysia or in Indonesia by using neoclassical approaches. They may miss some important issues like the belief system, the traditions, and so on. So these are the very important points, I think, in terms of how we look at secular methodologies and why we should look at some alternatives. And we see that more and more schools of thought and scholars and students, they look at alternatives. And just last point is that I see after economic crisis of 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s, there are many students of economics across the world who have become disillusioned, and they even have their own like movements, like alternative or alternative movement for new economics. And you see here sometimes you'll see like Institute for Economic Thinking or New Economic Thinking, and these were started by basically by students after these crashes, after these crises. And so I think this is important, also important to realize the limitations and the need for new kind of view, new alternatives. But then, of course, we'll discuss all of this from the Islamic, Quranic, Maqasidi perspective. So I want to stop here, and maybe we can discuss some of these points. Anyone is so welcome to comment.
Yeah, Prof. Yeah, since we have like others who are already proficient on economic aspect, maybe as a beginner, I'll just start the conversation. There are like underpinning economic theories that we use, like the law of supply and demand, market efficiency, stuff like that. Do we need to have an Islamic perspective on them, or can we already accept them as truth, or like how do we handle existing philosophical principles used in the current economic system? Because I think like there's also a thought that's being proposed now that we should like have our own Islamic way of thinking and develop our own laws and principles. That's more leaning towards how we should be understanding Islamic finance or Islamic economy. So then, how do we handle the law of supply and demand, which seems to be the dominant theory being implemented and seems to be true to some extent? Because I don't have a mechanism, or I'm not sure if there already been criticism on this one, but it seems to be the predominant understanding. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Zaid, do you want to handle this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, yes, that's a very good question. Because I know once we reviewed the work of Dr. Asad Zaman, And he even refuses to accept supply and demand as well. And that was, and he had a good argument, but at what level? I mean, the simple relationship. Do we agree that increase in price, would that make you buy more or buy less? Can we take this as a, that's what we call it a law and mainstream economic thinking? And so do we disagree with that? So yes, the story, if we start with very simple, very controlled experiment with all other things held constant, and then law of supply, law of demand should probably hold. It gets complicated when we have multiple players and somebody just attacks the assumptions. So a lot of times we attack the assumptions behind it, not the simple case study or simple model it is presented in. And this is kind of where Dr. Ildus's presentation was saying that sometime when we are presenting these, when economic thinking is presented, it is suffers, we call it short-termism or like a limited generalizability, but then the challenge here, so it is very important for us to be clear and state what part of the current economic thinking we accept and what we do not. Do we accept that uncontrolled, excessive money supply will lead to inflation, for example? And this is connects with my question in the previous lecture. Do we have anything that we can consider to be positive economics within our Islamic economic thinking? And what is, we call normative economic? So that's connect with that conversation. Do we take that as, at least building blocks? So, but here, and so that's one challenge. The other challenge that comes, if we are not happy with supply and demand, so what is our alternative view of how the world is working? Like in the comment that was mentioned, even in comments like Dr. Basma positive, is that there is a purpose behind it. It was more general, was more like systems of life systems, but then there was maybe a couple of things happening. There was specializations in all fields, and there was also a push to make sure that these sciences actually produce some kind of useful predictions, not stay at a generalization that is hard to be used, for example, in public policy or in managing a company, because if you are just too general, then what's really the purpose? So then you have this, can we think in terms of marginal revenue and marginal costs? Does it increase, and where they intersect with each other, this is profit maximization. So do we disagree with all of that? Do we? So here's, let me emphasize one thing here. That these models, yes, they need to be simplified, and there's a lot of thinking has to go into it, because every time you add a factor or a variable into this model, it becomes very hard to predict the outcomes, because now many things are moving at the same time. So then it is kind of, first, we'll have a challenge of, if we don't like this, what is our alternative? If we have an alternative, how can we build an experiment that shows the performance of our understanding of the world and its impact on maybe at a micro level, at how a company is managing its affairs, for example, or maybe a small cooperative, how they conduct their affairs, and benchmark that performance versus the performance of something, a company or a cooperative, whatever it is, that is using straightforward neoclassical thinking. Then we go to higher level public policy and macroeconomic policy. Well, what exactly are our alternative proposals here? versus, and sometimes like right now, U.S. Monetary policy try to balance between two factors. We have unemployment and we have inflation. And we believe that there is some kind of a balance between the two. And then if you achieve that balance, then we are in good shape. So right now, if we believe the statistics coming from the American US economy, we have about 3.33. We're about the 3% inflation rate, 3% unemployment, and 3% growth. Now, for a country the size of the United States, these are incredible statistics. This is very healthy economy, looking at it from a very, very macro level. Now there comes the short-termism. Well, this is all, we are not measuring all the externalities of environmental destruction, the exploitation around the world, and disparity in income and wealth distribution and all this and that. So these are true, but we have to start with some kind of point. I mean, imagine a sick person coming in, or like a doctor examining a person. You have to start with some key vital statistics, well, blood pressure, temperature, something like that. So these are by themselves are not enough. Maybe we have to still see what else is, how healthy is this person, have a holistic view. But these are still very important aspects of at least checking the vitality. So here we go again. Do we disagree with all of that? Do we care about a measure of unemployment or employment? Is this right measure? How is it unemployment is measured? How about inflation? Inflation, there's a massive debate about among economists and macroeconomists how to measure inflation. And there's many variations and calculation methods. So trying to get a more accurate measurement of inflation. So here, so there is a lot of debate within the mainstream. And there is there is a lot of people come at it with a sincere effort to try to improve the status quo. What I like about it is that some of the things that Dr. Ildus is saying, that at least they try to, here is a logical process of thinking. I can clearly tell you my thinking. I can clearly tell you my assumptions, and you can attack it. You can attack the assumption, you can this and that. At the end of the day, this is my prediction, and this is my empirical results that supports my argument. And you can bring other empirical argument that can disapprove my argument. What do you have? How are you arguing for your point of view? So that's when we say, like, reimagining economic and finance. What I'm hoping that we achieve in this class is not, in this course, is setting an agenda to say, and part of the agenda, part of the approach that I would find useful personally is not simply stating generalities and general moral principles. We have, to a certain degree, we have plenty of that. But ultimately coming up with models of how we behave, how we interact, what we consider to be potentially positive statements in economics, just like possibly positive statements in physics and in all these other sciences, about how basic behavior, how we basically react to life event or economic conditions, and based on that, present some kind of a model that shows exactly how we think people will react in an economic setting, and why would the outcome be better. And then if we can test it somewhere, then that will be really, and show at least some empirical evidence, then we can really say that we have made a major progress towards providing an alternative. Wallahu alam.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zaid. Well, yeah, Dr. Basma, please go ahead.
And first of all, I regret highly not attending all of the classes. This is incredibly stimulating and incredibly interesting. I just have a few comments. A short bit on that question of supply and demand. I'm very interested in, I'll go back and I'll watch the videos, inshallah, of previous classes. But I'm finding that the discussion of whether we agree with something or whether we hold on to something or not is premature. The idea, I think, is to, as you're building this reimagining, you'll look back and in hindsight, reconsider these laws. And I put it in a huge quote because obviously it is not a law. Oh, there's an effect there. SubhanAllah. So I would urge that, you know, you take your time in thinking about and not jumping to that question of do we accept this or not. I think you'll have a much stronger foundation, hopefully, once this process is more complete. So that do we agree with or disagree with all of this? Now, I want to point out, and this is the comment that I made in the chat, because this to me is very important as a policy scientist and as somebody who studied economics in the weirdest way. We studied economics, basically, classical, neoclassical, Keynesian, and it was only to then say institutional economics. It was only to then say what the problem was with all of these. Now, the comment that I made and what I see is that there was a transition at some point in history. There was a shift in thought that went from we want to understand what's happening between nations and in trade and in economics to we are going to attempt to shape how the world works. And this is the trap that conversation we were just having is caught in. We're caught in the Milton Friedman, Chicago School trap of this is what the world should look like. There's supply and demand. Markets cleared. There's no transaction costs. The human being is greedy and selfish and individualistic. That world never existed and never will exist. The way that the Chicago School experimented in Latin America made that world a reality. That reality didn't exist before that. So I think we're burdening ourselves too much by trying to say, we have to show how this would work, what the validity would be. We have to have predictability. The Chicago School did not have predictability. They imposed the predictability. The predictability was that what they were proposing was going to be a dire failure. It was going to lead to poverty. It was going to lead to death. It led to political assassinations of the leadership in Latin America. And this is the way that we began to see neoclassical economics or its overall paradigm implemented anywhere. And so it didn't have predictive power. That was imposed on the world. This was imposed. We were told, if this happens, this is going to happen, but that wasn't true. They had torture chambers in Ford factories in these countries. So my point here being is that we have to be very careful when we're dealing with these and thinking about these methodologies, because there was a shift in history where what we're seeing today was not a natural outcome of some kind of study that was actually plausible. Economics was not plausible. The mathematical models are not plausible. This is not the way the world works. This is not the way humans are. And we have to be careful of that. When we say predictability, predictability for who? The Quran, and we're going to talk about this in a second, I'm assuming, is very complex. There is no one group of people. When we say predictability, predictability for who? For the people that believe, for the people that disbelieve, for the hypocrites, for the generous of heart, for the greedy, for the selfish. So again, we have to be careful with what we want to carry with us, the lenses we want to wear when we're going to enter the revelation sphere. The last point I'll make, and I'll urge you to read this, all of you probably as economists have read it, read the theory of moral sentiments of Adam Smith and recognize that that is completely neglected. It was neglected soon after because Adam Smith did not come at the wealth of nations and how he thought of economics from a blank moral slate. He made the case that if you are not a moral person, if you do not believe in a God, then you are depraved and the economic system would ultimately fail. And so part of his understanding of self-interest was the fact that a person was self-interested in salvation and in morality. So those are just some of my, the things that I love this course. And thank you for having me today. And I look forward to attending the rest of the sessions, inshallah.
Thank
So
you.
one of the challenges that we have, so of course we're talking to each other here, and we're already very critical of the status quo. So it's easy for us to just simply echo each other. It's very important in the middle of this is to also play a little bit of devil advocates here, and then push back. So when it comes to the monetarist theory, I mean, obviously Milton Friedman had studied history, for example, and he has with Ann Schwartz, he has the interest rate study, longitudinal study. And he studied previous crises and financial crises, and that's why. So it is. I mean, that's why I was like, I would maybe take issues that there was this predictability is based on nothing. Maybe I think there are evidence that and what he's saying is basically was a very simple argument. Essentially, was one thing he was responding to Keynesianism, and there was what he called the theory of the money supply theory for Keynes. Money multiplied by money velocity equals a price, and the price level multiplied by the amount of output. And his attack on that one is that, which was argued for interventionist and fine-tuning of the economy, and interventionist monetary policy, including expansion in monetary policy, can help the economy. And he comes and attack that, the velocity factor there is not really stable, so you cannot use that equation to make any prediction. So there's a lot of, again, like stuff that Dr. Ildus mentioned in the approach of mainstream economics, is that there is some rigor, there is some logic, there are references to empirical evidence. So Milton Friedman did not just say, hey, logically, I think 1, 2, 3 will happen. He actually backed his assumption and his assertions with empirical data. And then that also but again, people did not exactly take everything he said at face value, because from his lecture in 1967, but when we hit the stagflation in 73 onward, then his ideas came to the fore. Obviously, we had stagflation, we had inflation, we had this, and we said this is because of the mainstream understanding that the U.S. abused its money supply policies to finance wars, to finance all kind of other initiatives. So I just taken. We need to be more careful with these assumptions that, or like these arguments that we are presenting, because for the reason I mentioned. So let's keep the conversation, I guess, going. Brother Jailani, تفضل.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a very good conversation, actually. Very, very interesting. I'll just comment on this point that's been raised by Dr. Basma and also by Brother Zaid. Is I think there's inherent bias in any worldview, really. If you think about it, there's a natural bias anyway, that most people have, then there's what I would call a ideological bias based upon your worldview. So, most capitalist economists of whichever type would argue against dialectic materialism and this class divide because they just don't accept it. So you have a worldview based on that. And then you have a very diverse worldview based on what is known as capitalist economics. But obviously, you need to delve into that a bit more detail and look at all the differences, even amongst monetarists. Others that I don't want to patronize the group. I'm sure we all know there are various flavors. So my view of this is, there isn't actually fundamentally one view of what is now known to be capitalist economics. It generally evolves based upon a number of assumptions. So the first major change after Adam Smith and his ilk is obviously after the Wall Street crash, where they just felt if we just increased the money supply and we just kept on liquidating the economy, or not liquidating, but if we made the economy more liquid, we could have dealt with that. And and then obviously there was another evolution after World War II and so on. So there's actually it's generally evolutionary, and this is one of the factors, or if you like, one of the symptoms of any man-made view is it is fundamentally will have to be evolutionary as things change. Which brings me on to the point that was raised earlier, which is, do we take models like supply and demand, and what is our view on it? And again, this is just my view, and obviously I'm open to any criticism of this point. Is as long as, see, my view is as long as we know when something is purely observational, so it doesn't come at it from a particular view, and just says, look, we're just gonna measure what happens between three variables: supply, demand, and price. And we're going to say what happens in a normal good, which is widely available, and we notice that X, Y, and Z happens. Then we look at goods that have a particular scarcity and so on, and then we can see goods which where there's some interference in the market, either there's some collusion or the government intervenes, and then we see price moves in a certain way. Personally, I don't see those things as problematic, as long as we clearly state the assumptions and they are purely observational, meaning you're not trying to inflect your worldview, as Dr. Basma has actually pointed out. You're not trying to prove something. I don't see a problem with those. And the reason for that is because as things change, you can discard them. If it doesn't work in the real world, you just say, well, look, we tried this method. It's purely observational, and we realized some of the assumptions we made just don't hold true. That's not a problem, because that's just part of learning. So that's just my take on it, and inshallah, I'm obviously welcome to any thoughts or criticism of that.
So thank you, Brother Jalil. Well, when I look at methodology and the significance of methodologies, and pair it with an idea of worldview, and this is what I said, that it guides a person to formulate questions, to see problems in certain way. So some of us may see a problem in let's say, in supply and demand, and in inflation from a maybe pure and empirical view. So we look at what happens in the world today. We see that let's say the central bank is reducing the interest rates, and the supply of money is increasing, and so this is where the credit is become more available, and so people start buying up stuff, and naturally the prices increase. So that's one look at it, and maybe it's the simplest way to look at it, and this is what many governments do today when they faced with the issue of inflation. So they raise interest rates, and that's the main vehicle, and that's the best tool they have right now. But is it the best? Historically, there are other ways to deal with these issues, and one of them is guiding smaller banks, and actually establishing smaller community banks, and maybe central banks or local authorities. They guide the smaller banks to finance local businesses, so that the economy does not revolve around assets that already exist. So buying and selling the assets that have already been built, and like real estate, for example. So this contributes to the inflation, but also what contributes to it is psychological condition. When people are faced with, let's say, they see empirically. I mean, they see that people are buying apartments, and then they resell them, and then they get some profit. And so people get into it again, and they get into the game. In the end, we see that it's a zero-sum game. It's not like at personal level, but it is at the societal level. And we see this also at the psychological level, where people really tend to suffer emotionally, psychologically from all this economic problems, which they become part of, and they become part of it, and they contribute to that problem with their behavior. Now, historically, you can, and by looking at this issue from different perspectives, not only pure economics, not only behavioral perspective, but also institutional perspective. For example, you would need to, you would suggest establishing smaller community financial organizations that will support local businesses, for example. This is what Germany and Japan has done after the World War II, and China has also done after they started the new economic policy. I think after it was from 1980s. So there are varieties of things that we can think of, and in terms of science, science has usually, I mean, modern science has these three functions. Sometimes they reduce to two, but I would say it is three functions. So one is description, then the description of the phenomena, then forecasting or prognosis or prediction, and also control. So these are three, in my opinion, these are most all science is trying to do, the empirical science is trying to do. And it is easy in physical sciences because there are just a few physical laws that are more or less well known. And like the laws of thermodynamics, for example, they are well known, and they hold for many situations. And but when it comes to human behavior, applying these assumptions, these economic assumptions, based on certain school of thought, like neoclassical or maybe Marxist or something, it has its own background. It has its own methodology, which is different from what we have in science. And a very interesting article I think I would share with you all. It's interesting, written by Dr. Samir Swadim. And the article is what economics can learn from natural science or from science. And in that he writes, actually he brings a quote from Andrew Law, who says that in physics, three laws explain 99% of all phenomena. And in economics, 99 laws explain 3% of all phenomena. And he actually goes on to really argue about how we don't use science in economics, and we can, by really employing like even physics in the study of economics, we can really look and maybe come to different different understanding and better understanding. Again, the author Sami Eswailim, he is actually now, I think he's the head of IRTI, and the title of his article is What Economics Can Learn from Science. It was published in 2016. Interesting stuff. Well, any other addition to this? Or we have another like 45 to 1 hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Yes, Daniel, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor Ildus. How are you?
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
I just want to say that, all of these benefits of secular methodology, I think at the philosophical level, we need to scrutinize all of these things, whether they hold or not. These are claims, yes, attached to secular methodologies. But in my view, a lot of these claims are contestable, we can contest. For example, as it is said that they're open to new ideas. But then along with that, it is said that, they're all tied to evolutionary progress. So a lot of scholars say that capitalism and Marxism at the broader level are similar ideas. Similarly, when we talk about measurement, measurement is subject to choice. And choice is not a neutral activity. You always choose something, and you have what you call standard criteria based on which you choose. And I think we don't have divine standards or criteria. These are all man-made. So it's a choice. So choice is always a loaded activity. And thirdly, I'm just pointing out these things so that they can enrich our discussion. I would love to quote Nietzsche or Friedrich Nietzsche. Like Nietzsche, he used to say that there is no truth, everything is a perspective. But then, it begs the question, whether this statement is a truth or a perspective. If it is truth, then there is truth. And if it is a perspective, then it's a meaningless statement. So I think I'm just pointing out that, we need to scrutinize all of these claims attached to secular methodologies as well. As far as I'm concerned, I think they do not hold. It's empirical based because, at the end of the day, philosophically, when we say that something is empirical, then we have to ask what is empirical. It's just my observation. Philosophically, things are intersubjective agreements. We cannot say that it's objectively empirical. Even empirical, it's contestable. So I'm just raising these points. Maybe they can, enrich the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Daniel. Definitely. Even the scientists themselves, after Kurt Gödel wrote his famous incompleteness theorem. There are two theorems on incompleteness. So any system, any formal system is incomplete. And by meaning incomplete is that it cannot explain itself. The system doesn't explain itself. You need something else to explain it. So external, you need something external. And so this is where I'm proposing that this reimagined discipline looks at life systems as they are. And this includes our flora and fauna and human beings and all the interrelations between all of those systems. And within those systems are, of course, our relations, our economic relations, and maybe political relations, and so on, as part of those systems that need to study from this transdisciplinary perspective. And what it means is that we look at it by taking different, looking at different perspectives. It's a range. It's a multifaceted approach to analyzing things. And one scholar, it would be difficult to really discuss this. And this is where we need some sort of collective understanding, collective approach, or collective ijtihad, I would say, in dealing with these things. But then we need to base this discussions if, let's say, if we are at the level between Muslims, all right, we have to bring something that all of us will agree on. And this agreement, I think most Muslims will agree that this is the Quran, this is the revelation. And how do we go about it? How do we go about using the revelation in building a methodology, in using it in our in analyzing those life systems, in analyzing all those problems that we face daily. And so, and here, I'm just like I feel myself as a school student, right, in front of a teacher who actually co-wrote the book, Re-envisioning Islamic Scholarship. So we start with the purpose, and this is what we at Maqasid Institute, and the whole purpose of Maqasid Institute is to highlight this idea that you have to think from this perspective. It's not reactionary. Oftentimes we have this reactionary perspective where we see a problem and immediately we try to find a solution to it. From whatever the methodology it is, we may be professing the like the empirical school or the Marxist or some other schools, or maybe we belong to different madhab, and we immediately try to just find a solution. What did our sheikh said, or what did our other person said? But something that all of us we would agree on is that the Quran will provide a foundation for agreement. But this is where it's not enough only to understand that, okay, this is the basis, this is the foundation that we agree. And then let us consider some element of it which is very important, is the purpose. We are starting with the purpose, or with the niyyah. So this is where let's say even the famous hadith on إنما الأعمال بالنيات, and also I think some other ayats from the Quran. وأقم وجهك للدين حنيفا فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. So you put yourself on that on that path, and so you place yourself as a person and have that purpose in mind, that you always try to achieve what is good and what is required of me as a Muslim, required by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by my Creator. But to understand this, so we have this purity of niyyah, for example. We understand what is supposed to be our niyyah. But then how do we find it? How do we look at it? And this is where we do the cycles of reflection. We think of sorry, can I just stop for a minute?
Yeah, sure. There you go.
Something. Anyway, so how do we do that? This is where we will talk about it a little bit more in the next session. But basically, it is by looking at different elements while we read the Quran and the Sunnah, and we try to understand the concepts, and related to it are all the objectives and values, and all the other elements. What it does is when we establish this relationship with the Book of Allah, But also, if you in parallel, you can actually look at it this way: that if you follow certain school of thought and their books, you will be affected, and your worldview, your thinking, your cognitive capacities will kind of shaped by what you read. And so what we say is that by establishing this relationship with the Book of Allah, we allow this book, we allow the revelation to form our thinking, our cognitive capacities, our reflection on the world, our thinking. And so this is where, by using this methodology, we built a kind of framework or perception of the world that is around us. And this is where it affects how we look at the world, how we critique, we may critique the world around us based on this worldview that is built by reading the Quran more and more, and establishing this relationship with the revelation. So it is an exercise of building the worldview. All right, and then this worldview in turn it affects our perception of things, our perception of phenomena, and then we kind of look at things differently. And the key principles, again, as we stated, that we start with an intention and with the purpose, and we use the revelation as the core of Islamic scholarship. And again, you see also in my Islamic epistemology class, I like to come to show a chart with the sources of knowledge. Where do we acquire knowledge? And among those sources is authority. And who is the authority is supposed to be the authority for us, for Muslims? It is, even though we regard highly the scholars from the past, but the single most important authority is the revelation. Of course, the Quran al-Karim and the Sunnah of the Prophet. So this is the core of Islamic scholarship. Then the issue of language, this is where we read in the book Re-envisioning Islamic scholarship the idea or the importance of the Arabic language. Well, we cannot overstate or overemphasize this idea, the understanding the Quranic Arabic, which is different from day-to-day, the Amiya or the dialect Arabic. And this language, it has its own, the Quranic Arabic has its own beauty and the depth. But then also, in my view, and this is important also more for those who would like to do serious scholarship, serious research into the Quran and use it in their research. But then for people maybe who don't have the who have I don't know, do not know the Arabic as much, or maybe they're just starting out. We can still use some translations, but good translations, and this is where, and also asking specialists and those who know what the meaning would be, and so in my case, because I do not I know a little bit of Arabic, not as really good, but then. I use a lot of translations, different translations, and in English, I usually use the Muhammad Asad. I think this is the best translation available today Muhammad Assad's The Message of the Quran. And also another Turkish scholar here. I also use them. They kind of they look alike. I mean those translations. And so the language is important in trying to understand the message of the Quran, or at least we need to be asking the people who know and those who we trust that they know what they talk about. And of course, the cycles of reflection upon the Quran and Sunnah, the more we read it, the more it opens its message to us. And this is where I remember Prof. Jasser Oda in one of the Quran reflection programs, I think in the first, in one of the sessions, he said that you knock on the door of the Quran and wait, and you keep on knocking, keep on asking questions, and it will provide answers. So Iman here is very important. And this is where when we, even when we say that Al-Falah or the Hayat al-Tayyibah, when we talk about it as an economic concept, we see that it starts with Amal Salih, Man Amila Salihan min Dhakarin wa Untha, wa huwa mu'minun. So it is intimately connected with Iman. And Iman in its, it's also not just simply a belief, but it is more than that. It's being secure with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of your belief, and also providing security to other people because you are a believer, you are amin, you are trustworthy. And so these are the points that I wanted to mention. And just as an example, a couple of years ago, and this is something that I worked on, and of course we have a lot more examples where I thought about the some ideas, some concepts, and objectives, and values, commands, laws about related to work and workers. And so we see different concepts that are related to it, like Amal Salih, as I mentioned many times. Also the idea of Iman, Ihsan, and Itqan. What should be our behavior in terms of goodness, and in terms of our whether it is consumer behavior or producer behavior. Also the ideas of working towards it, sa'i or kasb, we try to reach something with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and we work towards it. So whether it is through trade or through some other activity. And the idea of rizq is all encompassing, and it is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everyone, for all. And also the ideas of the ta'awun, or helping or cooperating with one another. And related to it is that the fulfillment of contracts. So I mentioned falah and hayat al-tayyibah, and all other instruments like zakah and sadaqah and infaq, but also tazkiyah or tazkiyat al-nafs, whereby we as human beings, we always make mistakes, and we hope for Allah's forgiveness. And if we understand our place in it, we try to cleanse ourselves, either by giving sadaqah or by giving the paying out zakat. And one interesting thing is that I find it very interesting in one ayah. Those who know just remind me of this. The ayah about meeting the Prophet, before going and meeting with the Prophet, give sadaqah. What was the ayah specifically? And just we can find that exactly what it is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises believers to, before they go and meet the Prophet, they are advised to go and give sadaqah. And I also see sometimes that it really solves some problems even before going and meeting some person in authority. So even before you meet and go and meet someone like a head of state, a head of company, corporation, you go and ask for a solution from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you trust and rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by giving sadaqah, you rely on it. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may open up something for you at that point without you needing to really maybe disturb other people. And so among the objectives, we see that we need to be able to earn to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to earn a good life. We use trading, we use all kinds of kasb and sa'i and working, amal, in order to achieve something good in this life and also in the hereafter, and so also to provide for others and provide for ourselves, and all of that is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to understand that there is always some test is going on, and also among the objectives of work is to set good examples. And there are different values that I identified, like work is important as worship. We can take we can approach work as part of worship, as ibadah. And obligation is obligation can be obligation of work can be personal and also societal, and also provision of opportunities for work. I mean, those who in positions of power, they need to be able to provide these opportunities, whether it is freedom to engage in work in different kinds of work or entrepreneurial activities, freedom to work as a trader, or also to gain knowledge. And so there are rights of individuals, family members, society, and nature, and all other creatures. And also best are those that be most beneficent and useful to others. And I think this is from the hadith. Then there are commands, and you'll see the commands to work, to command to work, and also to fulfill contracts, cooperate, enjoy the good and forbid evil, and so on. Change what's in the soul to effect social change. And there are certain universal laws, and among them I identified from this different surahs. So everyone will see the results of their work, whether in this life or in the hereafter. And those who believe and do righteous deeds will have blessings and great reward. And work, and God will, and Allah will see your work, as well as the messenger and the believers. And the physical world is just made pliable or musakhar for humans, so that it's easier to earn a living, and that the daylight is for earning a living, and also the access to provisions without work leads to corruption. And so there are different groups, and this is just two groups, and of course there are many different groups that we can enumerate. So it's not only muhsinun, mufsidun, muslihun, and so on, and all of them are related to certain objectives and concepts in turn. So when you read the Quran, you need to also notice those connections as well. And so there are different levels of people: rich and poor, strong and feeble, leaders, followers. So I think in this institute we state again and again in many different avenues that there is no equality there is no equality between people, between genders. Everyone has his or her own place in the world, and whether we are in the position of a scholar or a politician or a business person, we are different, but we are complementary. We are complementing each other. And so this difference is or this diversity there is a lot of rahma in that. In terms of, but it doesn't mean inequality. It doesn't mean we promote inequality. It's not what we mean. It's some sort of equity. It's difference. It's diversity. And then there are proofs. Of course, they can be empirical proofs, and there are proofs also from the Quran and Sunnah. So these are just a few of my ideas and from our colleagues at our institute, and I really admire the work of our colleagues in providing this, giving us those ideas. And this is what in turn we're trying to do in different avenues, in different like lectures or institutes. And lastly, this is what I also wanted to share. How do we translate? So we looked at, we read the Quran, we read the Revelation. We have some ideas also from the empirical studies. In the short term, what do we do? What would be the, let's say, if we have a situation, let's say, of gig work, what is that? The freelancing and the gig economies, so-called. And we see a lot of problems in those areas in terms of workers not getting their rights. And the corporations are using this loophole not to pay certain benefits and to minimize their expenses. And so what would be the short term? Of course, it can be done through maybe good governance, through the law. And maybe there could be some worker unions, and they can negotiate with corporations, they can negotiate with lawmakers. And maybe they can appeal to courts. And so some sort of a legal solution or some negotiation can be used. But in long term, what I think here is that the good governance is not enough. And what we require is some form of education or islah at individual level, at educational level, and also at a more government level, at more kind of societal levels. But also, of course, all of this should have like a foundation, the shared foundation that we understand what it means, the Tawheed, what it means, and then how it all should affect our behavior, and so on. So this is just briefly what I wanted to share with you today. And I think we can discuss a little bit more, 20, 30, 40 minutes, as long as we can go. I think it's a very important area. We're just starting these discussions, and we will continue in the next one. And today is just the like a taste of what it is, the maqasid methodology and ideas behind it. So that's all for me, and it's all open for discussion. Thank you. Dr. Basma, I would really like, or maybe Zaid, anyone.
Let me just have a quick comment and then give Dr. Basma maybe time to prepare her points. So within this model that Dr. Ildus suggested here, so one of the injunction that the Quran Kareem actually repeatedly speaks about is that the silat al-arham, This is that we have connections between us, and then we actually emphasized and looked at the connectivity aspect that the Maqasid methodology calls upon. And we said, well, the current model tried to cut connectivities, or not try to see humanities in isolations, one, atomic individuals. One way to improve the welfare of people in the gig economy and to even bring benefits at both the person level or at the level of the people providing who are part of the contracting these services as gig workers, as well as overall savings and efficiency in the economy at large, is to find ways to improve connectivity. What does that mean? For example, that means that I know, can we help the consumers and the buyers and and the people in the gig economy to connect? How can we do that? Maybe the application or that they are using, if it simply has the picture of the person delivering the product to them, if it has the picture of the person preparing their food, for example, or packaging their food, or made a product, made the clothes, suddenly now we have a picture and we have a human connection. Now, if under that picture there is a name, suddenly it's another connection. If the name and where they are, maybe a name and one line about who they are, like what it took, for example, to prepare that meal or to deliver or this or that, aspiration. It's like very, very concise, but this concise, extra information, it brings in compassion. It brings in salat al-rahab, that it makes that person not just a name or just an anonymous person who is giving me a service. No, it gives them a face and a story with it. Now, what can be? So this is where I start talking about modeling this, because, well, this is an expense. At the face of it, this is an expense. I'm as a businessman, why would I even care about any of that? I have absolutely no incentive to do this. I mean, unless you tell me some people can choose, and this is like a normative statement, for example, maybe because it gets backed up by empirical evidence that if there are two competing delivery services, one that gives you the human connection and one that does not give you the human connection or context or anything about it, would I choose one over another? Which one would I choose? Well, what if there is a price difference between them? Because I'm putting this effort, I'm putting a picture, I'm putting description, I'm giving you a story here and there. This first takes more of your time because you're reading more information. You're just like, I just want this one. I don't give me any extra information. And then it's simply, and that also takes maybe resources because you have to find the picture and load it and this and make sure that everything looks good. This is extra cost, so you might charge extra money for it. Would we still make the choice to go with the app and the service that gives me human connection over the one that does not? So that is, and sometimes this is not a completely novel experience. Sometimes I see like coffee, this is a fair trade coffee, and people choose to go for the fair trade coffee versus, and sometimes there is actually a picture of the farm or something like that, and just gives you that connection. Now, but another way to look at it, potentially, if I people, I create loyalty, maybe the people who have this personal connection tend to order more often, so on and so forth, then maybe that increase my sales, and then that will incentivize me to nurture these connections. Now, think about another scenario. So again, I'm trying to think maybe in a very materialistic way, but working with a positive, making positive arguments as in cause and effect that can incentivize business owners or developers of these apps, what's in it for them. So for example, we can say, and this part of Sila, tawasul and like communicating and connecting with each other and telling each other a story. Like, I know you believe, like, your food will be late. If you just simply say that, your food gonna be late, maybe it's gonna be cold by the time. So if you just hear that message, then you might be annoyed, like, I just canceled, just send me another order, whatever, you can cancel. And that is a net loss to the people who are the business, maybe the people who prepare the food and so on and so forth. Everybody, there is a loss. But if you put it in part of a story, like you already know the person, you know the person who made the food, you know the person who's delivering the food, and you say something like, I know you care about your safety and safety of everybody on the road because of an avoidable accident or something like that. Your food will be a bit late, and then, but because I know you care about the safety of everybody around, I hope this is acceptable to you. So now that we put a little bit of a story, a little bit of compassion in it, perhaps, but if that messaging leads to 5% reduction in rejecting, 5% drop in rejecting food deliveries, that can translate into a dollar figure that incentivize people to invest in this approach, or whatever. We can figure out what is this percentage that can incentivize business people to take to use this approach. Now, this approach is inspired by what I consider the revelation, and I'm trying to take out of the revelation something that is practical, that I can build a business model around it, and then perhaps I can test it and see if it performs better. And if it did not perform better, why it did not perform better, I can keep working on it until it is better. So this is just an example of what I would like us to also consider, as we need to provide models, business models, behavioral models, where our principles and these, like the 7 elements of analysis that we produce can interact to produce what we call real islah, at least even at a simple micro level islah, until we reach the full system, re-evaluation and reconstruction. Allah alam. Dr. Basma?
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, can I take us back a little bit? I mean, just the foundation of maybe what you were just mentioning. So back to the one thing I'd like to point out about the framework, and it's probably the most difficult for people to get their heads around. And I know, alhamdulillah, mashallah, you're all seasoned scholars, but it's still perhaps the most difficult to get your head around when you're reading the Quran, which is the proofs. Of all the areas that are possible to explain to people that study the methodology, the proofs are perhaps the hardest. So the proofs are not only what the Quran offers as proofs for its statements of fact, but proofs are also what the Quran tells us are valid proofs in reality, valid ways of argument, validity. So it's not just evidence, so for instance, this law of supply and demand that we've been mentioning, the Quran would tell you, how is it that you reach that so-called law? And is that valid? So throughout the Quran, you will find ways that it will say, this is how somebody argued something, and that's an invalid way of arguing. Or this is how we argue this point. This is the evidence that we have to put forward. These are the stages or the phases that we would have to consider to have this conclusion or this so-called law. So that is just a small point on proofs in the Quran. The other thing is, for me, when I approach the economic thinking in the Quran, I start with a key concept. And there's several key concepts, as Dr. Ildus, mashallah, pointed out. But when you draw the diagram, when you draw the picture of the concepts in the Quran, some of the bubbles are going to be bigger than others. It's always useful to start with a bubble that will link other bubbles. So any system, as you all know, we have nodes, we have connections between the nodes, and we have a boundary. Now, this is really important when you're studying the Quran because boundaries are very difficult to determine because obviously it's all connected. And not only is the Quran connected to itself, it is also connected to the world to which it refers. So cutting off or finding that boundary is not very easy. I start with the concept of rizq. And why do I do that? I do that because in the very opening of the Quran, we're told, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And then it goes on to tell us who are the muttaqin. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. So we know that we are not going to benefit from the Quranic text or understanding the Quranic text, reaping its intellectual openings, unless we are of those who spend out of their rizq. So we know that rizq is a fundamental concept in belief in being Muslim and in understanding the Quran. Now, when you take that bubble and you put rizq in it and you begin to do your map, and when you read the Quran, you will realize that rizq is related to absolutely everything that Dr. Ildus, mashallah, covered in his concepts. But it's also related to concepts that will pull in the system a bit, to my mind, for this group. Because it's all well and fine to say life systems, but then we're caught in where do we draw the boundaries? And then it becomes everything. And I tend to think when I read the Quran, I think of economics or the economic discipline as something that has to involve some form of exchange. So when I read the Quran, we had, of course, some of the concepts that I put in our chat, al-bay', which is a selling, shara, which is buying, tijara is in the Quran, which is trade, tabadul, which is exchange, sira', nisara fil khayrat, that you compete to do good, is a form of competition in the Quran. Sukhriya is a form of commissioning of each other, that we are different levels and so we can work with each other. It's not a matter of equality, but inequality is not a disadvantage in Islam because we dignify each other no matter what we have. We also have the idea of mal or wealth, and of course that's in all of its forms, and the idea of infaq. When we draw this map and we draw the connections between them and the relationships that emerge between, and of course the map gets more complex, between the actors in the system and how we identify those actors within the system. So, and how we identify the institutions within the system. This map becomes very complex, but it helps to start from key concepts, in my opinion, and to understand them correctly. Now, when we do that, and this is my final point for this morning, when we start from a concept like the concept of rizq, we are redefining the paradigm. I call it the rizq mentality. How to think in terms of rizq. So how to know how it relates to the whole, how to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a proprietor and provider, how to understand the dynamics and the institutions of rizq. This is all in the Quran. How to understand competition, how to understand implications. All of this is in the Quran of rizq. And this is the beginning of the Muslim mentality when it comes to economics. And it's a very, very different one than the one we currently have, how we think of scarcity. So someone, I think it was Sister Ambreen, she put in the hadith in the chat, for instance, of the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was hesitant or refused to price, to fix a price or to state the price of something. And if we read the entirety of the Quran and we read that hadith, you realize that it's not about price fixing, nor is it necessarily about demand and supply. It is a taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is, and I don't translate taqwa as fear, it's heedfulness, but it's also a form of fear that you will misprice something. Because we neither know the stores nor the absolute value of anything. Only Allah knows the value of things, the value of water, the value of clean air, the value of resources. Only He knows the levels that are available, the stores of what He calls in the Quran His mercy. And so it's not that we shouldn't set prices, which is unfortunately how the hadith was understood. It's not that we shouldn't set prices. It's that those who engage in that exercise have to have taqwa, have to be very thoughtful about how they are pricing things and for what purpose. And they have to be cognizant of what the Prophet ﷺ said is a common, like water and salt and pasture. There are things in Islam that are not priced, they're not sold, they're not private property to begin with. So there has to be this general understanding of, you know, what do we price to begin with? What is amenable to being priced and controlled and what is not? So again, just to wrap up, I think starting from these key concepts can be really helpful. And really in this group, having those initial philosophical arguments, or what I call the rizq mentality, or the way a Muslim, a mu'min should think, because that will really help in terms of moving forward and progressing towards a system or thoughts, new thought that is truly Islamic. A trap I'm noticing that we're falling into in the discussion is we're constantly trying to justify the system that exists, or try to understand it, or try to approve it, or try to critique it. If it's going to be really a re-envisioning process, I think these ideas have to be discussed first and vetted and critiqued among this group as you move forward. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basma. Thank you. Well,
Very
any
quickly,
other comments?
see, Ildus. So this is definitely a very complicated project. And we're talking about an area of discussion that's been around for maybe now 60, 70 years since the very start. And there are universities with departments that are supposedly working day and night on providing the alternative. And here we come into this. What we are trying to say, and we've said this like several times, is that one, we need definitely have a background. And this is, we are combining the maqasid methodology with this re-envisioning. But the whole idea is that we need to set an agenda, just like a discovery, a process of discovery. Like you're saying, we easily fall back into justifying. We attack, we critique this, but we're not providing alternatives. And we are, but one thing is that there's an evolution in figuring out how to deal with the current situation and maybe have a breakthrough through it. So we said, let's start with this course. And the maqasid methodology, again, it's a flexible framework that does not necessarily impose on us any specific answer. It's just if we agree with it, like our axiomatic, principle that Quran is true word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is a source of guidance. And this, if we take that as a given, this is our assumption, this is a given, then, but do we agree on it as foundation for what we're trying to do? In practice, what does that mean? So the maqasid methodology can come along and say, in practice, this is how we can deal with the Quran Kareem and takes us one more step. Now, are we actually now willing to invest ourselves in contemplating Al-Quran Kareem from the beginning to end with research questions in mind? Now, can we, and then after that, can we perhaps go then systematically over either a mainstream textbook in economics and just understanding from the perspective of the Quran Kareem? Then can we also, after it can be a full program, just simply going on over a presentation in Islamic economics textbook and go thoroughly through it. And then all along, we are developing an agenda. We're developing questions. We are developing perspective, critique of the status quo, so on and so forth, as well as identifying what is useful. Then perhaps a fourth stage where we start having, okay, now what can we provide as an alternative? So it is inshallah, I see it as a marathon, but it's with a purpose. And hopefully, as we go, we are learning a lot, ta'ala, and we're learning from each other. And we are creating some base foundation for us to use to communicate with each other, because that is one of the hardest things. When I come from a different background, and every one of us here come from vastly different backgrounds, it's incredibly hard for us to talk to each other simply. So this course provide some kind of language that help us communicate with each other. Allahu A'lam.
Well, any questions? Please, it's an open discussion, please. Anyone? Yes,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah, so like I just want to reflect, like I think the way you put like life system public policy in transdisciplinary analysis, I think it's a very good way of like trying to grasp the concept. I'm not an expert yet, like I'm not on your level yet, but like in our reflecting on the current situation right now, like the economic system is not only about economy, it's a matter of life and death on some nations being affected how the economy works right now. So in terms of public policy, like would you then would states then say stop consuming certain goods categories or brands that affects economy, but that then affects the life of other nations? So, and then on that transdisciplinary analysis, it seems that economy is not just about economy, it's about diplomacy, and it's also about peace on some aspects. So I think like just reflecting on that, and then just going back to what Sister Basma mentioned a while ago, like the current contemporary understanding is not the mainstream before, it was imposed. So if it was imposed and it's not the mainstream understanding before, then looking back, what was the understanding before? What was the economic policies? So I'm thinking there was a time that Muslim nations ruled a huge portion of the world. Like I mean, I'm imagining Ottoman, something like that. So if Ottoman Empire or a Muslim nation, or I'm not sure if Muslim nation would be a proper way of describing it, how were they handling economy? How would they handling diplomacy? Was there an alternative, or was there a different way of thinking about supply and demand, on how to price goods, on how do they relate money or transactions? So, and then what was the life system then? Public policies are being imposed to the people. Were there more wars? I'm not sure. So I think like this is a very good way of, I mean, the discussion right now is relevant to the current context and gives us time to reflect on the past and hopefully like create a model for future.
Let me add something that you mentioned that's interesting. Like, you know, the saying that you can take a good person and you put them in a bad environment and then you'll corrupt that person. So sometimes there's a challenge in, we might come up with a good concept that is Islamically driven. For example, awqaf, you know, big endowments. But there's a big problem if you bring that concept and you build multi-million, multi-billion dollar awqaf, but this awqaf is managed from a purely capitalistic entrepreneurial point of view. That awqaf might actually be involved in labor exploitation and environment destruction and all kind of problems, and all in the name of awqaf. Well, this is awqaf, we have to treat it, we have to run it professionally. Well, how do you run it professionally? If I have a rental building and somebody does not pay rent on time, you know, he gets kicked out. So why do you kick them out? Because, well, I need to generate money. So there is that issue. And this one time, I don't know, I posed the question to Brother Ildus because there's so many awqaf in Turkey. So, but how are they managing this awqaf? So a family and the person loses his job and this and that. What do they do to that person? Do they just give him an extra month and then you're out? Or would they say, no, I mean, this whole thing is for sabilillah. I don't help that person, then what's the purpose of the waqf altogether? I'm getting money from that person to go help the needy. But the needy are in your awqaf. But then there is a problem. Okay, if I don't do that, then others will exploit the system. That's a whole one issue, for example. Now, another issue that I've raised even to Dr. Jasser, because he calls for awqaf all the time. So like, yes, that's a nice concept, but what happens, imagine what happens if you have this massive concentration of wealth. But sometimes it doesn't matter who owns the wealth. What matters is who is managing the wealth, who is controlling that wealth and controlling that investment. So now we're creating a class of people at the end of the day who are managing billions of dollars and they're making massive decisions. What happens when people cannot have a place to own because the Waqf bought all the best properties in the area and continue to buy, for example. Then now they are raising, costs for everybody else. What happens just simply when you have a lot of money in one pot, how well can it be managed and how much, corruption that attracts? Because once you have lots of money in one spot, that attracts corruption. And then so there are a lot of things that happen. So it's not, the answer is not simply al-qaf. It is, well, tell me how this waqf is properly managed, what is its policy, how is it actually helping people, what other Islamic guidelines they meet beyond simply managing a productive asset and squeezing as much profit as possible from it in the name of doing good. So that's why, like when you say, like in the Maqaf methodology, think holistically, think about all the different details about it, and not just simply take a general concept at a high level and run with it. And that same thing goes for zakat, institutions and all these other institutions that we talk about. Wallahu alam.
There is just very quickly, I want to just address this question and some points. So number one, as an historical example, the Osman Dawla, it was not highly centralized. So there were, it's like a federative, what is it? Like a federation. And the states, the wilayat under the Osmanli, they were kind of independent. They were independent in terms of local government. And so, and this is where the beauty of the system is that there is not so much centralized governance of the whole big empire. So, and this is where it is easier to manage like a local entity. And we see that the majority of countries that do well today, they are small. So this is historically what used to happen. And then in terms of awqaf, also historically and at present, the waqf deeds, they used to be quite detailed. So to the minutest detail, to the those minute details about who will get how much, if they employ people, what will be the their salary. So all the details will be there in the deed. And all of those deeds, they were supposed to be registered or with the courts. So it goes through the court system. And if there is mismanagement, then it can go back to courts. So that's it. And then also in terms of what happens if if someone let's say cannot pay rent or do something, this is where the connections are important. And these organizations, they are built on connections, on personal connections between people, and they, within that network, they find a solution to a person. So if somebody cannot pay and stay here, let's say in one place, they may be invited to go to some other place, or they can be given work somewhere else. So a solution will be found within the network. All right, so it's not just a matter of kicking out, which is the easiest thing, but it's actually finding the solution within the network and using this the approach, the rahma, the brotherhood, to find a good solution, not just any solution, but a good solution. So I mean, this is my experience and what I have seen so far. Of course, there could be some bad apples, but that's my experience.
Of course, that's not possible at the state level. We all know that. That's at the state
Yeah,
level.
yes.
Which I think you were asking about. For the Latin American countries, if you're interested, they were mostly socialist. And I'm not making a value statement on whether I think that's good economics or not, but that was their choice at the time, which we're talking import substitution, welfare state, price controls, tariffs, to enable them to overcome some of the difficulties that they were facing from the period of colonialism and imperialism that the Western, although they were West as well, but the imperial powers had gained at their expense. So they were not given that opportunity. Now, today, it's a very different ballgame because at the international level, we're dealing with a lot of supranational organizations, including the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, different UN bodies. It's not so simple anymore. It's not about a country deciding it's going to cut off a certain product or not. It's not the way it works at the state level. This is why divestment and boycotts at the consumer level within countries is so controversial, because that's really where change can happen. Within states, however, it's much more difficult because of the agreements they've already signed. And so long as it's not obviously an illicit product or something that is outlawed, it would be very difficult for a country to say, unless they were one of the elite group of countries that have that privilege, like Canada, for instance, is not really permitting investments in its healthcare system. We have a public healthcare system here. Yes, there is some private provision, but we've pushed back very strongly in terms of opening up, particularly to American competitors. Dairy is another area where Canadians are very militant about investments in the dairy sector to protect dairy producers. Now, can a less powerful trade partner do that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, historically and even today. So at the state level, it's very different. Can we change that over time? I really don't know at this point. And it's just complicated. And we'd have to have different levels of analysis for that kind of thinking. From the Islamic perspective too, it would not be it wouldn't be an authoritarian dictatorial thing, which what we see in the world today with the so-called predominantly Muslim societies. There is something, I mean, at least that we are birthing, hopefully, in this institute, and that started slightly before we started this institute, which is a public policy in Islam. It does involve a form of democratic negotiation. It does involve the listening to stakeholders and the involvement of stakeholders, not just nationally, but internationally. So that's we need a few more sessions on that one. So at the state level, much more complicated than what we're talking to every time we bring it down to the individual, family, communal levels.
Yeah, that's where we gets into that debate. And again, I've got a quick comment. Is small beautiful, or is small really ugly in this world that we live in? And I really see that you have to have economic heft, and that usually through regional, like building regional economic blocks, so that you can negotiate better terms for yourself and for the countries in that economic blocks if you are a small island country or small country to begin in general. All right.
Okay.
I think this
Okay.
is
So
we
we've come
already
to the
passed our time, right?
yeah.
But
Yes. Okay. Let me. Well, Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and special thanks to Dr. Basma for joining us. And everyone, actually, we are here to discuss this important issues, and I think hopefully it will be doubly rewarding from the from the perspective that we're trying to look at all these issues from the Quranic perspective. And we are here to seek the pleasure of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and in whatever we do, even the smallest thing. So hopefully what we do will be beneficial. And as the Prophet said, so the best of people are those who are most beneficial. So hopefully we would be among those, inshallah. So thank you very much, everyone. And Sister Ambreen, would you like to conclude?
Sure. We were really privileged to have Dr. Basma with us. It reminds me that I started my bachelor's degree with public policy and public administration, but I switched to economics because it was taught in a very weird way. So I developed another interest by listening to some of your lectures recently in Triple IT, and inshallah hope to see you soon in Malaysia. So thank you, everyone. We were having a short attendance today, but it was very fruitful discussion. So let's end our session, inshallah, with the Surah Al-Asr. Inshallah, see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.
جزاكم الله خير.
Thank you very much.
جزاكم الله تعالى.